welcome to Wednesday Night Live. Let me know that you are here either by way of the comments in the Facebook Live or possibly by way of comments in YouTube as well. I'm checking those here myself to see, and so love to hear that you're here with us. Not 100% sure again what you may be seeing on your end, so we're gonna check it out and see. I will say, as we're here at the beginning, I do believe we have a lot of the issues we dealt with last week and potentially even this week are from my computer, not any of the other things, and got some things set up to take care of that. Unfortunately, they did not make it here by today, so hopefully by next week we'll get some of those things taken care of. But again, if you're with us, if you're watching, let us know in the comments. That way I know somebody can see me, I know somebody can hear me. Alright, so we got Eric. That's good. If you're on with me on YouTube, let me know. From my view of things, it appears maybe that it could potentially be a little choppy. Okay, we got Eric, we have Daniel. Again, let me know on your end what that's like, because I really don't know, because it seems like here is very different than what I see in here. Somebody let me know if the video goes out. If it does that, we'll switch over to the other camera that we looked at. But for right now, we'll do the best with what we got here. And let's see here. All right, Mitchell's are here. Adam Steed is here. Adam, glad to see Adam here. We've been praying for Adam. Excited about Missions Month coming. Again, if you're just hopping on here, don't know what the audio or video will be like, but we'll try to get in there as soon as possible, taken care of. Hopefully some of the stuff that we can get to fix that will be here next week. Somebody alert me as soon as it happens if the video goes out, and we'll try to switch cameras and do the best we can, at least for one more week with what we have. Again, if you're joining us, this is Wednesday Night Live by Pioneer Baptist Church. I'm Pastor Adam Lugo. I will be your host every week. We'll be here with new content, a different Bible study through the book of Ecclesiastes here. And in order for this to work properly the way that we want it to, we want you to interact with us. So again, let us know you're here. Good to know the Mitchells are here. Good to know Adam Steed is here. Good to know my family is here. The Kellys are here. It looks like the Tuckers are here. If you happen to jump in late, let us know. We want to hear from you. Facebook is good. YouTube is good. So that's good to hear. All right, we're going to jump right in here with the first segment, and that is the bestest. I have really enjoyed hearing about some of these, the bestest from you. Good to see Hope here as well, Terry, Michelle. Glad to hear you guys things are going well right now, and excited about that. The bestest, here is this week's the bestest. This is a conversation I just had in the car with my two older sons, and this is kind of what stirred the question this week, and that is this: what is the bestest homemade meal? Not meal bought at a store, homemade. Maybe your spouse makes it, maybe your mom or dad made it, maybe it's something that your grandma or grandfather makes. Maybe it's something that your aunt or uncle used to make growing up. Tell me, what is your favorite homemade meal and who makes it? For a long time, my favorite homemade meal was Cassie made some really good chicken parm and spaghetti, or actually I liked it chicken parm and penne. But no lie, just last week she made some homemade fried chicken that was out of this world. I told her it was the best fried chicken I've had in the 6 years we've been here in Oregon, and that was not a lie. That is the truth. It was awesome. And when we were riding in the car, Gabe said the same thing, that his was fried chicken. Daniel says chicken Alfredo, and I'm going to guess that that's his own chicken Alfredo, because I will say, Daniel makes easily the best chicken Alfredo I have ever had. Ever. I don't homemade or made in a restaurant, doesn't matter. Cassie has taken his recipe, stolen it, and makes it here at home. It's excellent as well. George Mitchell says fried chicken parm bites with Alfredo. See, I'm when it's chicken parm, I'm red sauce when it comes to chicken parm, but I'm sure it's good. Fried chicken parm bites with Alfredo. I'm sure it's delicious. Delicious. Every time I see Eric's comment of little choppy, I think somebody is saying pork chops. I just see the word chop and think, oh, somebody likes pork chops. That is not the case. But let us know. Some of you haven't written in yet. What is your favorite homemade meal? Something that somebody has made for you, whether it's yourself, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your grandma, whether it's your parents, something like that. What is your favorite homemade meal? I don't even know if I can say those words, Eric. My mom's Fleshkigla with Westphalian noodles. Well, when I'm done here, I'm going to have to Google that and find out what's going on. Hope says pierogies. It's good stuff as well. I agree. Very much agree. Who makes them? Do you make them, Hope? Because if you make them, I'd love to try them. That'd be awesome. But you know what, Eric? I think I remember you saying something about those before and telling me what they are, but now I don't remember. But check them out. Sounds good. We got some fried chicken parm bites. We got with homemade Alfredo sauce. We got pierogies. We got chicken Alfredo. We got fried chicken. We got mom's Fleshkigla, and I have no clue if I'm saying that right. Fleshkigla with Westphalian sauce noodles. And sometimes I wonder if you're not just making up words to hear me say them. Anyway, if you got something else you like, let us know in the comment section, and we'll make mention of those as well. I might come knocking on your door one day asking for some of those things. We'll move on to the next one, and that is today's life hack. Cassie says, my mom's cream of crab soup. It is very good. Anita Carley says, my own, not the meatloaf with potatoes and salad. We had meatloaf yesterday, which is I always say is one of my most underrated homemade meals. Love it. And so it is delicious. Okay, Hope makes the pierogies. All right. Sounds good. And so, and that's the nice thing about meatloaf. It's so, making it not the meatloaf, so no meat in there. I'm sure it can be still full of flavor and delicious. And we also had it with potatoes last night. So that was delicious. Anyway, today's life hack is this, and this just came to mind because of the situation we're in. We're just a couple of weeks ago, and can be helpful for people. And that is this: that you know that you can use your cell phone. You can take a cell phone light. Actually, you could take any kind of light and stick it underneath a water bottle, underneath a Gatorade bottle, to make a lantern that distributes light better than the direct beam from your cell phone or from some other light source. If you stick it underneath one of those bottles, it hits those colors and dissipates that light a little bit more and distributes that light a little bit better in places rather than one direct beam. So just maybe a thought to use sometime in the future if you ever are without power for any amount of time ever again. Let's see. The Mitchells say Dad's lobster thermidor. Now, for a long time I did not like lobster, and then we spent like a month in Maine, and we ate a lot of lobster, and it was really good up there. I've never had lobster thermidor. Anything homemade, Brittany or Dad's spaghetti sauce. Anything homemade. Wow, anything homemade. I will say there's something about homemade food that is delicious. Keep them coming. Fact of the day. I don't even know how I came across today's fact of the day, but I thought it was very interesting. At least for me personally, I thought it was kind of interesting. Today's fact of the day is this. Ants, actually it's multiple facts. Ants do not have lungs. They breathe through little holes all over their body. They also do not have blood vessels. Their heart is one long tube that pumps colorless blood from their head to the rear and back. It's just one tube, and it just pumps that blood back and forth. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. They don't have lungs. They don't have blood vessels, and their heart is not multi-valved like ours is. It goes throughout their whole body from beginning to end and pumps colorless blood from one end to the other. So there you go. Useless fact of the day. Again, like I said, sometimes maybe it'll show up on Jeopardy or something like that, or Trivial Pursuit, or maybe some other game you might be playing with your family, or just if you're looking for a way to start a conversation or possibly end a conversation. There you go. There is some information for you. All right, let's jump into the book of Ecclesiastes tonight. Actually, I think tonight's will probably end up being a little bit shorter just because of kind of where I ended up cutting off a little bit of our study. It just seemed like a good place to cut off, a good dividing point. We're not going to get the whole way through Ecclesiastes chapter 5, but just as a way of reminder, we ended Ecclesiastes chapter 4 with this thought, that no matter where you look, you will see trials and problems and people who could use some encouragement. We need one another. That's where we ended last week. Remember, the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 4 kind of, you could see it go from 1 to 2 to 3. That 2 were better than 1, and 3 was even better than 2 or 1. And it just talked about how important it was to serve alongside of, to work together with other people. And life is difficult, and people need encouragement from one another. So let's be those people of encouragement for others. That's where we ended in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Today we turn the page to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and I'm going to read with you. Okay. Third grade teacher. Those breathing holes are called spiracles. And that is true. I actually read a little bit more about it. I didn't just take the interesting fact. I read a lot more about it, and I almost put more details in there, but decided not to. But that is correct. They're called spiracles, and Hope just taught her third graders that last week. See, you can trust me. I'm not just dropping knowledge that's not true. Like, I got a third grade teacher backing me up here. Thank you, Hope. Spiracles. The miracle of spiracles. I said it. You were probably thinking it, and I just went ahead and said it. Anyway, I'm going to read the first 7 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and that's really where our focus is going to be tonight. Verses 1 through 7, Ecclesiastes chapter 5. And what I'm going to do is if I could encapsulate in one word the overarching theme of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, it would be this word. It would be the word value. Value. One of the things that he talks about is money. He does that in the book of Proverbs as well. But as we get into the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, we see that Solomon understands that there's more than one way to be wealthy, and that there's more than one way to be poor. And so what he does here is he shares some really important warnings that relate to value, that relate specifically to the value of our life and the value of aspects of our life. And I'm going to ask you some questions here in just a second. But again, he gives some warnings here. I want you to think about that word, the warnings. Verses 1 through 7 say this. Beginning in verse 1, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. That's really a rebuke to me. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of words. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow, than thou shouldest vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore God should be angry at thy voice, and destroy the work of thine hands. For in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God. but fear thou God. We just read those verses. I'm going to ask you this question. I'll give you a minute to answer it. How would you encapsulate the warning of these verses? How would you encapsulate the warning of verses 1 through 7? If I told you that Solomon in these 7 verses was giving us a warning, what do you think the overarching warning is from Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 1 through 7? It could be broken down a whole bunch of ways. I did just give it one overarching warning. You may hit that overarching warning. You may answer it from a few individual things maybe that he said in there, and that's fine. But I want to hear from you. When you read, when I say there are some warnings here in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 1 through 7, if you can encapsulate them into one warning, how would you describe that warning? How would you describe it? I'll give you a minute to answer that, maybe even an opportunity to look back over it and think about some of the things that Solomon says here in these 7 verses. And while you're doing that, I want you to realize, and I know we kind of ended it last week, but Solomon last week in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 goes from the courtroom to the marketplace to the highway to the temple. We looked at that. To the palace. He goes from the courtroom to the marketplace to the highway to the palace. But that actually wasn't the end of his travels. We see here as we come into Ecclesiastes chapter 5, he makes a stop at the temple, and I think the temple, the place of sacrifice and worship, is important in the overall context of Ecclesiastes chapter 5. So we have a couple of them coming in here. Terry Michelle say, "Be slow to speak and quick to hear," and so that's very true, right? Because and that repeats kind of the words, or resounds the words from the book of James in chapter 1 that tells us that. Be slow to speak and quick to hear. Eric says, "Don't make promises you can't keep." That's clearly in there. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Daniel says, "Beware the power of your words," and that's very true. I think all of us are certainly centering on what Solomon says about the mouth, and I think all of these are true. If I were to, and I, by the way, I have way more time to think about this, to read it, to study it, to prepare it. If I were to encapsulate the warning in these 7 verses, it would be this: don't rob God, or be careful, beware of robbing God. And I think a lot of these things have to do with our prayers, our worship, vows or promises that are made here. And so all of these things that you mentioned play a part in that. But if I were to take an overarching kind of 30,000 foot look down on these seven verses, I would say that the overarching warning is don't rob God. And specifically in these 7 verses, we see from what he's talking here, he enters into the temple. He talks about sacrifices. He talks about making vows to God. And so very clearly, worship of God is at the heart of what he is talking about. And when I started to think through some of these things, and along with this warning about don't rob God, I want to ask you a question, and there can be loads of answers. And some of these may be very personal to you. Some of these may be things that you've observed. Some of these things may be warnings that you have heard before. But I want us to think about this morning, or this evening. What are some ways that we rob God in our worship? I think he speaks to some of them here, but there are more than just what he speaks to. And when I say we, again, maybe they're personal to you, maybe they're observations that you see for yourself. But what are ways? What are some ways that either you've noticed, you've seen, you've experienced yourself and been convicted of, ways that we rob God in our worship, um, or that we can potentially rob God in our worship if we're not careful? What are some ways that we rob God? I want you to go ahead and answer that question. And while you're doing that, part of the reason I say this is because I believe, and you have it here on your screen, the worship of God is the highest ministry of the church and must come from a devoted heart and a yielded will. The worship of God, the worship of God, prescribing worth to God, is the highest ministry of the church and must come from a devoted heart and a yielded will. I mean, worshiping God should be central and so important to what we do. But oftentimes in our worship, we rob God. And so I haven't seen quite as many answers come pouring in yet. But what are some ways that we rob God in our worship? Thinking about lunch during church. I mean, sometimes it's just a natural thing. You know, your stomach growls. Maybe you smell something that smells good. But I would say distractions. Sometimes we will allow distractions. And that's why oftentimes I'll pray and ask God to remove those distractions, to help us be focused. And sometimes we bring those distractions on ourselves. And so, you know, sometimes we plan something right after the morning service, and so our thoughts are on it. Sometimes it's, you know, it's, I know we put stuff in the crock pot. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but, you know, setting something to be ready at home right after this, you know, something so we're distracted by those things, or things we bring into church with us that we don't need that can become a distraction. Eric says, my number one is by not spending time or enough concentrated time with God. And yeah, I agree with that. And I think a lot of us are probably there with you, that we rob God in that way. Clayton say, letting our minds wander and not focused on Him. And that's very true. Daniel talks about looking to get entertainment out of worship, having the wrong focus on worship, which is a very self-centered focus on worship. While we do want the Word of God to work in us and change us, if it's strictly about entertainment, then there's a major issue there. Cassie says not being prepared for worship, not having a correct mindset. A mindset is very important. The hearts mentioned that we can rob God by focusing on ourself, our needs, our performance. Again, so many of these are when worship of God is to be focused on Him and is to be about Him. So many of the answers that you guys even mentioned are things that come back on us. What about me? And again, we want God to work in us, and I think we ought to ask God to work in us and to reveal truth to us and to change us. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think we all understand that oftentimes the issue becomes when we become the focus more than God becomes the focus. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ways that we can rob God here in just a second. And so let me turn this question. Okay, I'm going to turn it on you a little bit, and I want to ask this question: what are some better ways to prepare ourselves for worship? And I know I have preached sermons before that worship does not just happen on Sunday morning from 10:30 to 11. Worship can happen in your car. Worship can happen in your living room. Worship can happen in at your office cubicle. Worship can happen when you're running down the road. Worship can happen in a lot of places. But here in the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 5, he is in the temple. We definitely get this sense that he's at a place of worship. And so let's maybe turn our focus in that way. What are some practical ways that we can better prepare ourselves to worship so that my focus isn't just on me, so that my focus isn't just on entertainment, so that my mind doesn't wander? so that I am properly, Cassie just said, not being prepared. How do we better prepare? So that my mind isn't thinking strictly on lunch afterward, so that I am spending more time and concentrated time with God. What are some just very practical, helpful ways that we can better prepare ourselves for worship? And again, I think there's a multitude of answers for this. Um, Subduing our enthusiasm. Uh, can you explain a little bit more? Um, and I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about what you're saying, because we're certainly supposed to worship the Lord in spirit and in truth. Um, and so, um, while truth is a part of it, a spirit, a true heartfelt worship can be enthusiastic. And so I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just trying to understand maybe a little bit better as far as that is concerned. I also noticed you put a question mark, so you're thinking maybe. I don't know. Anybody else? A thought about that? Ways to better prepare ourselves for worship. Okay. George says getting to bed early, having a plan for meals, having a morning time for prayer. I do think that plays a part in it, because I understand for many of us, Sunday is usually a weekend in which there is it's where we're focused on resting and rejuvenating ourselves, and so we'll sleep in. We'll kind of schedule up to the last second, and so having a plan for all of these things, leaving margin even in Sunday morning schedules is helpful. Cassie says having things set out and ready to go for the morning so that it's not stressful to get to the door. Anita talks about reading the passage beforehand. I think that's a really, really helpful thing, Anita, to mention. And that's one of the things about that I do like about what we're doing. And when we just go through a book chapter by chapter and verse by verse, you know what's coming next. Now, you might underread or overread, but you can generally, especially in the Gospels like John, you can generally tell, okay, this is the next narrative, this is the next section. I'm going to read through that so that I can be better ready to engage. I think it's a great one. The hearts say, be ready to hear. There's no doubt about that, right? So he even mentions Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 1. Eric mentions right along with that, less talking, more listening. So that's very true as well. And by the way, sometimes listening isn't just here with these. Sometimes listening is here with this, and listening to the Holy Spirit work and talk in your heart. Let's see. Terry Cross mentions being more concerned about what other people think than what God desires. So yeah, I mean, pushing those things away and going, all right, focusing on what God desires for us. Anita Carly talks about just coming on time, right? I think that's a huge thing, because it's intentionally set up to where the prayer time and the worship in prayer and the worship in singing prepares us also for the worship in the Word. And so you miss an aspect of worship when you miss the service. We intentionally try not to put too much fluff in the beginning of our services, or really we leave all the fluff, announcements and all of those kinds of things for the end, for that very purpose. Because when we start, we want us to understand we're worshiping the Lord, and our focus is turned there, and we'll let you know what's going on next when we're done. But I think that plays a huge part in it, just being on time. Any other thoughts concerning ways to better prepare ourselves for worship? I'm going to share something really quickly. One of the first ones that came to mind, and this is a hard pill for me to swallow, and it may be for you as well. Spend some time in confession. And I'm not talking about a booth. with me sitting on the other side. I wouldn't do that anyway. Me, sitting in a booth with some priest sitting on the other side. I'm talking about to the Lord. Um, is asking the Lord to shine the light of His holiness into your heart and to cleanse you. Search me, O God. Try my heart. Try me and know my way. See if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting, is what David said. I think a time of confession to the Lord is important in preparation for worship. I think a time of what's the word? I'm going to think of the word here. Not sacrifice, but opening ourselves up to the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm laying myself down before you, and I'm submit a time of submission, maybe is the way to put it. I don't know. Before the service even starts, you go, Lord, I don't even know what we're going to sing. I don't know what's going to be said. I don't know what we're going to look at in your word per se. I don't know the things that pastor's going to preach on. But Lord, help me to submit to you and have a time of submission. I do think here in these verses that Solomon gives some really helpful thoughts here along the way as well. So let's look at them in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. It says this. It says, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Somebody mentioned just a minute ago about being ready to hear. I think being ready to hear is an important aspect of this as well. But I do want us for just a minute to focus on the phrase that comes right at that. He says, then to give the sacrifice of fools. The thing that was trying to be avoided was the sacrifice of fools. Not sacrifice in general, but foolish sacrifices. I believe that sacrifice is one of the parts of worship, which comes along with what Anita mentioned just a minute ago, and that is, coming on time. That means we got to sacrifice and make sure that we're there, that we're engaged, that we're ready to go. And some of these other things, we're gonna have to sacrifice in order for them to happen. But I have this question here. We don't offer animals to God as sacrifices anymore. But what are some things that we can offer to God in our worship? So in other words, what are some proper sacrifices for us to offer to God in our worship? I think obviously sacrificing our ears to God, our hearts to God, being ready to hear is one of those sacrifices. Especially in a day and age when so many things are grasping for your ear and want you to listen. And again, this goes along with what Terry said, with what Eric said, with less talk and more listening. But what are some things that we, and maybe you might even have a Bible verse to back it up. But what are some things we can offer to God in our worship that aren't foolish sacrifices, but they're right and good sacrifices to make in worship? What are some things that we can sacrifice to Him? Think about that for just a second. And I'll wait for some of those answers. And I'll take a drink of water while I do it. Things we sacrifice to the Lord. Sacrifices that can be made. I'll share a couple of them while we're waiting. Okay, sacrifice of praise. The Bible specifically says that. Sacrifice of thanks or thanksgiving. Sacrifice of our money, giving, are some of the things the Bible speaks about for sure. We can sacrifice our bodies are to be living sacrifices. And so we sacrifice our bodies. Now, how do you do that? Well, by serving other people. I have also sacrificing our praise, sacrificing our works, our prayers. These are all things that can be sacrifices to the Lord. Our time, okay, that's another one. We sacrifice our time to the Lord in worship. I was watching a video on YouTube the other day. I showed it to Cassie, and I hesitate to say it because now I know somebody will do it. But when we lived in North Carolina, there was this thing that, and it was a very specific demographic. It was older ladies, and that was when 12 o'clock hit. When 12 and our service started at 11. We had Sunday school at 10, Sunday service at 11. But when 12 o'clock hit and an hour was up, I am not lying. People, older ladies is typically who it was. They would take out their keys. They would rustle through their purse, take out their keys, and I was showing Cassie a video. Somebody's doing a spoof on it, but it was so true. They would take out their keys and they would literally like rattle their keys, like it's time to wrap it up. I'll just be honest, that bothered me because that is that's not a sacrifice of time. That's checking a box and saying, all right, I'm here. My time's up. God, your time is up. It's me. It's my time now. Sacrifice by fasting. That's very true, and that is such an important and underutilized sacrifice of our worship. That shows the genuineness and the seriousness of things that we're pursuing or praying about. The Clayton's mentioned actually taking the time to study his word, right? And so that's a sacrifice of time and effort. Time, talent, treasure. That's a great, and I've heard that preached before. I've preached that before, but it's a very simple way to remember things that we can sacrifice. Lord, I sacrifice my time. I can sacrifice my talents. I can sacrifice my treasure. Mitchell's mentioned you sacrifice our children, as in, yeah, we lay them on the altar for the Lord and say, Lord, we give them to you for you to lead and to guide. Yes, sacrifice my plans, very much so, to be spontaneous to the working of the Holy Spirit, and that's very true. And I've had this conversation with people as well. That's one of those really difficult things when it comes to worship, about being orderly, but also leaving enough room for the spontaneity of the Holy Spirit. And I'll be honest, that's something I still haven't quite gotten right. That's being rude? I'm not sure. Oh, you mean talking about jingling the keys? I'm guessing that's what you're talking about. Yes, it's very rude, and it would drive me crazy. But let's keep moving through these verses here. Verse 2 goes on and it says this. It says, "Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few." So specifically here, it appears that he is talking about us talking to God. He says, "Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God." And so this appears to be our speaking to God in this moment. We would call that prayer. And I would say here that there are some important lessons here. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 7 says this. It says this. It says, "But when ye pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking." And so he says, hey, watch out for being hasty and using a bunch of fluff when you pray. We know in Matthew chapter 12, when Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, he says, "O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. A good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account therefore in the day of judgment. For by the words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. The Bible tells us very clearly that what's in my heart will come out of my mouth. What's in my heart will come out of my mouth. And so he says, be careful with your words. Matter of fact, sacrifice your words to the Lord. Watch out for hasty or too many words. Sometimes people think that their prayers have to, contain these certain elements and sound just right and be put together just right. And really, I think the secret is a prepared heart when it comes to worshiping the Lord. Next, let's keep going here. Verse 3. He says, for a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by a multitude of words. And I don't know if this was a more common saying in their time or not, but basically the whole idea he's trying to get across here is when somebody works hard, have a multitude of business, okay, they're going to sleep deeply and have lots of dreams. He says, just like the person who works hard and sleeps deeply has a lot of dreams, the foolish person is going to have a lot of words. In other words, these things are true. Work hard, deep sleep, dreams. Okay? Foolish person known by multitude of words. And so, and again, this is a conviction to me to think, hey, Ed, when you pray, there doesn't have to be a whole lot of fluff to it. Get to the point. The Lord knows. And I do think there's maybe a difference at times between my personal conversations alone with the Lord and certainly public prayer, which is probably going to be happening here in a place of worship. Continue going. Verses 4 through 7, and this is where we're going to end. I have a few other maybe questions or thoughts in here for you to speak to. Verses 4 through 7, and these are probably the most well-known sections here. It says, when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than thou shouldest vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the works of thine hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God. So in this section, he deals with this idea of making vows to the Lord. It's an interesting section. It's one that people have often considered and people have thought about and even debated about here. But he speaks about giving vows, promises to God. Now, before we move any further, before I ask any questions, I want to make this known. God does not require that we make vows. But the opportunity is there when we worship the Lord to express our devotion to God if a person or if individual feels led to do so. And so it's really important here to understand that God's not in this section of Scripture in the temple twisting anybody's arm to make any promises or to make any vows. He's not doing that. But in a worshipful setting, there are always opportunities there to express one's devotion to God if they felt led to do so. And I think that's important for us to understand. And so he says a couple of things that are important for us, and some of you mentioned them earlier. First of all, let me ask this question. I just said there's opportunities to make vows or promises to God. When do we see vows made in the setting of worship? As we kind of piece these things together, when in modern day worship, I guess I should say, when do we see vows being made? I'm trying to also catch up on some of these comments that I missed. It's great to see Kathy jumping in here with us. So, right, we sacrifice our time when we visit those who are incarcerated or in the hospital, volunteering to work with those who are in need. Any thoughts, though? When do we see vows made in the setting. When we use the word vows, we typically think about um, weddings, wedding vows, but I don't believe that's what he's speaking about here. Um, any thoughts? I'll wait. Terry Cross, if you don't mind, maybe rewrite that. Proverbs says that in a multitude of words, sin is unavoidable. Um, I'm not 100% sure uh, that is okay. So if you could rewrite that, would be awesome. So the heart's mentioned at an altar call, right, or at an invitation. There's an invitation oftentimes in the service. And by the way, you don't have to wait for an invitation, um, even if there isn't an invitation made. Um, I do think it's important for them to be there. I think Kathy Hawkins brings up another good one, missions giving in oftentimes what is known as a faith promise gift, and you read about some of those things in I think 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and so in our prayers, and so we can think through opportunities to make vows, to really to make promises to the Lord. To again, we think about specifically more in these altar calls or invitations, those opportunities. Yeah, even baby dedications. That's a great example as well, where we say, Lord, I'm giving this to you, and I'm promising to do this or to do that or to change this or to change that. And there are a few things when it comes to these things that Solomon speaks to. I'm going to give them to you tonight. First of all is this: don't make a promise with no intention to keep it. Don't make a promise with no intention to keep it. Don't make promises to God with no intention to keep it. The second thought was this: don't make a promise and then delay to keep it. Yeah, there we go, Terry Cross. That's right. And a multitude of words, sin is unavoidable. That's right. You keep talking long enough, you'll get yourself in plenty of trouble. But the second point there is don't make a promise and then delay to keep it. How many times have we heard illustrations or stories, or maybe you've known people that have done this, and I know it's a long-standing joke, and people joke, but it happens. People talk about it because it really happens. How many times have you heard people say, God, if you do this for me, I'll go to the mission field. And they don't really have any intentions of keeping that. God, if you do this for me, I'll start tithing. God, if you do this for me, and you can fill in the blank, right? Be careful with that. Be really careful with that. He says, listen, don't make a promise with no intention to keep it, and then don't make a promise and then delay to keep it. Fulfill that promise. Follow through on that promise. I think that's and some of this has changed for a lot of reasons. And I know a lot of people don't like come forward invitations. A lot of people, say, where is that in the Bible? And I understand some of those feelings about it. But one of the things that it would do is it would immediately give you some sort of accountability. And I remember when church I grew up in, every time somebody come to the altar call, there would be an altar worker there, and they would record the decision on a card that was made. Usually one was given to the pastor and one was given to that person. And depending on what it was, sometimes, not all of them, they weren't meant to be public, and they wouldn't be, but sometimes those decisions were to be made. This person has made a decision to be baptized. This person made a decision to trust Christ. This person made a decision to dedicate their life to the Lord. This person made a decision to go into full-time Christian service, and it would be read from the pulpit. And one of those things, it helps keep us accountable in the vows and the promises that we make to the Lord, and so I think those are good things for us to do. In verse 7, it ends this way: Verse 7 goes on and says, "From the multitude of dreams and many words, there are also diverse vanities, but fear thou God." In a really simple sense, this is what he's saying. Don't live in this dream world. Some people live in a dream world where they enjoy the feeling of dreaming about fulfilling their vow, but they never do it. And somebody even mentioned emotions earlier, but it's let me just give an example. When I was growing up, there was a big influx of young men and women who gave their life to serve the Lord in ministry in the church and school that I grew up in. And some of those decisions were made, and I'm just being honest with you, some of those decisions were not of the Lord. Some of those, well, everybody else is doing it and it seems so exciting and so wonderful, and they're dedicated to the Lord and they're sold out to the Lord, that I want to do that too. I want that. I want what they have. I want that feeling, rather than I want to really serve the Lord. And they enjoyed the feeling of that more than they did that. They enjoyed there are a lot of people that consistently live in a dream world of, I'm gonna do this one day for the Lord, or I've made this promise, Lord, and one day I'm gonna fulfill it. And they love dreaming about that one day when they fulfill it, but they never do it. They never actually follow through. That is, and I've written this here. Don't live in a world where you like the feeling of dreaming about fulfilling the vow, but never do it. That's a make-believe religion that neither glorifies God nor builds Christian character. That glorifies God character. That's right. The Claytons put it very simply. Don't forget, actions speak louder than words. Don't make these promises and then have no actions behind them. It's a very simple way to put it. If you're gonna talk the talk, walk the walk. Now, as a pastor, one of the most difficult things for me to do is to still encourage people to make vows, to promise to the Lord, to dedicate or give parts of their lives, really all of their lives, to the Lord. And so there's this delicate balance between people, because some people say, well, I don't want to make a promise because, I'd rather not make a promise. And the Bible says it's better not to make a promise than to make a promise and keep it. And so people look at that and go, so I'm not going to make any promises. That is not the point. The point is, worship the Lord from a devoted heart. Worship the Lord from a yielded will. And when He works in your heart, give those things to Him. Make promises to the Lord. Make vows to the Lord. But have enough character to follow up on it and to fulfill it. We're going to end in verse 7 here, and a couple minutes early. But in my mind, it was the best place to end Ecclesiastes chapter 5 without doing the entire chapter. Because there's a little bit of a corner that's turned there. Kind of verses 8 and 9 are kind of interesting. 10 through the end of the chapter can kind of more maybe difficult to understand, and so it takes a little bit of time there, and I didn't think we'd be able to wade through all of that tonight. But any closing thoughts about Ecclesiastes? And great to see many of you. We want to see you back here. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. I'll also give maybe you have a few closing thoughts about verses 1 through 7 of Ecclesiastes chapter 5. We are, I think, 6 or 7 weeks into it now, and I've enjoyed going through it with you. But let me say again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for reading. Thank you for helpful thoughts. And here's the thing. Wednesday nights, you can come and you can find out some of the bestest, learn life hacks, interesting facts, and learn God's Word, but also get some practical help, like tonight when we talked about ways that we rob God of worship, but then also ways that we can better prepare ourselves for worship. And so I hope those can be helpful to you tonight. And as we say every week, until next time, keep looking up. Life under the sun sometimes can be difficult. By the way, today was a beautiful day here in Oregon. Life under the sun was wonderful. But don't ever forget, we have a God who sees life and controls life from an eternal heavenly perspective. And so we keep looking up. We keep looking up for his return. We also keep looking up in trust to him. And so I want to say again, thank you guys for joining us this week, and we will see you next week.